Today's episode is brought to you by Slaters 50/50 and To a T Fitness.
Everything sequel contains explicit language. And why the fudge not, you melon farmer?
I'm on vacation. How about you? And welcome to the Everything Sequel podcast. Today we're talking about the Die Hard edition, and we are talking about A Good Day to Die Hard, the 2013 movie by John Moore. My name is Michael Shantz. I'm of the How Dare You Awards. Tom Stewart is here. Talk to me, Tom.
Newark. Now, you know what? This might not be a good movie and far from the best Die Hard, but that line is utter perfection.
I'll give it to you.
Yeah. And that's it.
Yeah, that's the end of the podcast. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all, and that's probably the only nice thing we have to say. All right, a 2013 movie. You know, A Good Day to Die Hard had a budget of $92 million, only made $67.3 million in the USA. But Tom, worldwide, $304.6 million. Once again, man, the world is coming through for the Die Hard franchise. This movie was a success based solely on what other countries had to say.
Well, I mean, this one seems way more targeted at the international market than previous Die Hards, so that, for at least for this movie, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, for sure. Here in the USA, it was the 54th highest grossing movie in 2013. You know, all the other movies, I think, the lowest was 16th for Live Free or Die Hard.
Ooh.
The other sequels were 7th highest grossing in the USA.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. This movie is directed by John Moore, who is, not like a brand new director or anything. He directed the Omen remake, Max Payne, Flight of the Intruder, Behind Enemy Lines.
Yeah.
Do you feel a pattern developing here? So does it
Bad
surprise
sequels
you
and
that
remakes?
Yeah, right, yeah. All right. We both agree that this is, we rank this movie last in the series for the sequels, correct?
Correct, and a less that wouldn't even make it on the same page of a Word document as the other movies.
Right. So where does this movie go so horribly wrong? I mean, here's the funny thing, Tom, and we talked about this in the other podcast. Die Hard 2 is based on a novel called 88 Minutes. Die Hard 3 is based on an original screenplay called Simon Says that they just made for the purposes of Die Hard. Same with Live Free or Die Hard. This movie was specifically written for the Die Hard franchise, thinking of John McClane, and yet we go off the rails, and for me, it's almost a complete failure. What went wrong?
I mean, let's start with what you said. Maybe, they stumbled upon exactly the right formula. You find a story and you die hardify it. Maybe that's just how you do it.
Right. That's the way to do it right.
For it to work. Then you've got a recognizable franchise plus a really strong original story. To me, I tell you something I did like up top about this movie.
All right.
The opening credits are really good.
All right.
They're beautiful. These kind of Saul Bass psycho swipes across the screen. It felt kind of classy. I felt like I was sitting set for a classy movie. It was only when we sort of see John McClane again that I had the sense that something was terribly, terribly wrong.
Well, what are you referring to? Are you
his first appearance? As the scene went on, I was like, "This is so humorless, so drab,
right,
so sad."
Yeah,
This is a sad movie. John McClane is sad throughout this movie. Now, we've talked about previous sequels, whether it's the actors who are sad and they're shooting around that. Roy Scheider enjoys Jaws 2, Richard Dreyfuss in another Stakeout. I think something similar might be going on here, where John McClane wasn't supposed to be as sad, so they wrote in this idea about his son is going to get executed by the Russians, and that's why he's sad.
Right.
But I didn't. There is, and it's kind of, it's slow, it's maudlin, it's melancholy, and that's the beginning of the movie. That's the first time we see. The first time we see Johnny's talking about how, and I think it's a great choice to focus on John McClane Jr. in this movie. That is like the untapped potential of where we can go with the family dynamic.
Right.
That's fine.
So I have
no issues with it.
It's funny you say that because, yes, you're right. It's the only place for the story to go.
Yeah.
Because of what happens in Live Free or Die Hard, you have to, you have to assume the relationship is repaired with the daughter, and she's even in the beginning of this movie, so it feels
and
like
it was nice
it's
to
repaired.
see them back together.
So there's nowhere
that.
for that to go, and the son is the only place to go, and yet for some reason that whole angle of this falls flat for me.
Definitely,
it doesn't work.
And I just don't remember in previous Die Hards them taking so much time for these moments of respite that immediately dial down the pace. These kind of moments between John and John.
Right.
Let's call them the John and Johns.
Well, he does call his son Jack.
And it's like everything just stops. And Die Hards, for whatever else you want to say about them, they don't stop like this.
Ever, right.
And we have several of these moments scattered throughout the film, and you see them coming a mile off, where they're gonna talk about their strained relationship, and they're gonna eventually tell each other that they forgive each other and love each other. And it takes a long time, and it's very sad, and there's nothing humorous or interesting happening.
Right.
And I think that, to me, that's the thing I noticed overall, especially having watched the other three sequels in advance of this. I'm like, that is something that is such a misjudgment of what this franchise is about.
Well, so let me ask you this, because speaking to that, we've spoken, in the other episodes, especially in the sequels, the idea of the brawn versus brain.
Yes.
And that's sort of the formula.
Right.
And here you don't have that. You have brawn versus brawn, which doesn't really work. But on top of that, these moments where they seem to go for humor, for me, also led to this character that we've been with now for, almost 30 years.
Right.
It starts falling into like toxic masculinity in a way that really bothered me in this movie. This idea where John McClane leans over when they get the guy out of jail and he sees his daughter and not all the plot nonsense has been revealed yet, and he's hugging his daughter and he leans over to his son and he goes, "That's a tender moment." And then he says, "You want a hug? We're not really a hugging family. Damn straight." This idea that like you can't be affectionate towards your son, I don't know, it just didn't sit well with me, and it's not the John McClane that I like.
Yeah, he's definitely now Bruce Willis Human Walnut.
Yeah.
He's passed over into Mr. Peanut now.
Completely. But did you have
I you know what? That is not anything that occurred to me, but you're absolutely right. I have a bunch of other things I don't like about this movie.
Right, I mean,
and I'm happy to talk about.
We might have to just start at the beginning and just,
the humor in general falls flat, and it's not like the movie isn't trying to kind of give Willis things to work with. I mean, that was my preconception.
It's not doing it well, though. I mean, really,
my preconception was that like it's gonna be unfunny, and they're not gonna give Willis jokes or one-liners or comic situations. They're in there. It's just his comic timing is so off.
Yeah.
You don't even know it's a comedy scene.
Well, and also the idea, because really, in my mind, this movie only has one joke.
Oh, yeah.
And the joke is, I'm on vacation.
Which is not true.
Which is not true, exactly. It's not true. That's a lie. You're not on vacation. Just because you're in another country doesn't mean you're on vacation. You're trying to save your son.
How untrue that is. Right, okay. If I were to say, like, it's not just he's not on vacation. The reason he is there is to stop his son being executed by the Russian government.
Right.
Now I don't know synonyms, antonyms. I don't think you can get further away from a definition of a vacation than that.
It's so far removed that you can't even possibly fathom why this sentence enters his brain, much less why he would give voice to the thought.
And he does it over and... Because, I mean, in the other, he has... That's the thing. It's about everything being a little bit off. In the other movies, yes, he has one-liners. Yes, he talks to himself. But he does not say the same thing repeatedly over and over in exactly the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? He has a range of jokes. And they give him that Russian taxi driver. And you're like, oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go, double act coming.
We got the Marvin.
That guy, that taxi driver is doing all the work in that scene.
Oh, he's the heavy lifter for sure.
Bruce Willis is asleep. Is medically asleep in that scene.
He was induced into a coma in the back seat while this cab driver, the actor, is working his ass off.
One of the things I think is kind of interesting because for a lot of franchises don't get to the fifth movie.
Right.
It's like quite a rarity. So I'm interested. This immediately made me think of all the other number fives.
Oh, okay.
In every other series. When I was watching this, I'm thinking this movie has exactly the same problem as Rambo: Last Blood, Rocky V. It's like they forget what the basic ingredients of the movie are.
The basic ingredients that make the series work in the first place.
Until 3/4 into the movie, and then they have to deliver so quickly that it's absurd.
And so let me ask you this. Was it a mistake to take it out of the USA at all? Should we not be in Russia? Is that part of the formula?
I can conceive of a universe in which that definitely works because we've seen the sequels have gradually been opening up. Like the original movie is in one building in LA.
Right.
Then we go to the East Coast, and then we go to
we go to the airport.
We're in an airport. Then we're in a city.
Yeah.
Then we're in a few different cities. So
really, this should have gone to outer space. They should have done McClane in space.
They might as well have done. But again, it's in and of itself, it is not a bad choice. I think the problem is more about genre. They try and tie this movie to a genre which the franchise is just doesn't sit right with. It's Die Hard can be adapted into many things, but I don't think it can be adapted into an espionage thriller.
Yeah, it's ill-equipped for that.
And I think and it's interesting, like, I started to watch the movie, and, you know, this is only 7 years ago, but I'd completely forgotten about what else was happening in 2013 movie-wise that would make them want to make a movie like this,
right.
Which is the Bourne films are the biggest movies in the world. The Daniel Craig James
right.
Bond movies are the highest-grossing Bond movies ever. Of course, you know, you're going to think this is a good idea at that moment.
Sure. So that explains it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it also explains why the style of this movie is so incongruous from anything we've seen before. It's that motion sickness style that we see in the Bond film, the Bourne movies.
But they make it work in the Bourne movies, and here it doesn't work.
Because that's an espionage film.
Yeah, there you go. So one thing, that you could say about all the movies have a moment where you think to yourself, okay, well, McClane would be dead.
You're right,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? Like, that's not quite on par. Like, when he kills the helicopter in Live Free or Die Hard, like, that car looks like it's traveling 90 miles per hour. He leaps out of the car about 20 feet before slamming into another car in a roll. And I just think, oh, he's dead. But for some reason, I forgive it in the other movies, and I don't here. With this initial car chase, he's in 2 car crashes where I
Oh,
think he's dead.
right. And I'm really just playing devil's advocate here. But one of the few moments I liked in the movie was when they flipped that on its head. And I think, and I'm going to say overall, I think the last quarter of the movie gives me some of that Die Hard goodness that I want. It's just too late. It's just too little, too late.
Uh-huh.
When they plunge into the water from, I don't know, a ridiculous height.
From above, yes.
And there's a moment where John Jr. thinks his dad has died, and it's just a camera trick. Like, he turns around and Bruce Willis, not John McClane, is standing there, like, just going, "Hi, yeah, I'm here." Like, I got
Yeah,
out of
not
the water.
only is he not dead, but he got himself out of the pool and just, I suppose, chose to not respond to the 4 calls of dad before that.
But I like
You
that
know?
because at least it's sort of it's a nod to some of the comedy in the series that works. But yes, I mean, that is a very rare example. Most of the time, it is just forgetting physics and that
Yeah,
that kind of
exactly.
thing. And I
Exactly.
mean, as soon as you said, the point at which John McClane dies, I mean, I immediately thought of the ejector seat in Die Hard 2, Die Harder.
Right.
But
Those grenades
do
take a long time to explode.
you know what? Like, I'm thinking about. Okay, well, so what's different about that? It's fun.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
like you get to see his face going crazy, and he goes up
A-
and he goes down. It's like there's something entertaining, spectacular about it. When it happens here, it's just like an oversight. It's like a scene they probably cut. There is an extended cut of this movie, which I will never see. that might resolve all these problems for you.
I doubt it.
I doubt it as
You
well.
know, you floated that story for Superman 4. I don't think another hour is
But
going to save any of these
there
movies.
was a major red flag when I saw that this was half an hour shorter than the other Die Hard movies.
That is a major red flag. Yeah, when you see a Die Hard movie and it's 90 minutes, you go, "Oh shit."
And
We're
that
in
should
trouble.
because like in any other that's what's great about watching sequels exclusively as we're doing,
Right.
is that in any other movie you'd be like, oh great, 90 minutes, so this movie's probably not going to outstay its welcome. When you see that in like a 3 and a 4 in the series, you're like, oh no, they shit the bed.
They shit the bed. All right. We are just getting started with A Good Day to Die Hard. Ladies and gentlemen, stick with us. We'll be right back, and we'll continue our chat right after this. Look, people, we're living in strange times. We know that, don't we? Of course we do. People don't even know what to do with themselves. We're getting stir crazy. Well, get outside and get yourself some great food, I say. You need to go to Slaters 50/50 in Point Loma's Liberty Station. It's time to treat yourself to booze, to beer, to burgers, and more. They have their full menu, people. Their full menu, I say. How many restaurants do you know that are doing that? Most places are doing a quarter of their menu, probably. Some might be doing a half. Maybe a few have got 3/4 of a menu. But Slater's 50/50 has their full menu, including their signature 50/50 patty. It's half ground beef. It's half ground bacon. It's 100% delicious. What more could you possibly ask? Worried about social distancing? Well, it is in place, people. Tables are separated, and the staff will always be seen wearing masks. You're out of excuses. Get off your keister and come on down to Liberty Station's own Slater's 50/50. Indoor dining available, outdoor dining available. Bring the family, bring your dog. Come enjoy the normal again. Good day to you. I said good day. And we're back. We're here talking about A Good Day to Die Hard. The titles just get longer and longer. Tom, clearly, this is, we're giving some shit to this Die Hard. We're talking about everything that doesn't work.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a couple things you think work. Like, is there anything on a big scale that you like about this movie? Because I'm hard pressed to think of anything myself.
I think the last quarter works okay. I think they find.
Do you mean when they get to Chernobyl?
I think that this is maybe a big problem of movies of this period, that it was very unfashionable in this moment to make movies that were kind of light-hearted action movies.
Right.
Like the era of Daniel Craig's Bond films, the Bourne films, they were kind of humorless. And I think in order to fit into that mold, the movie's is working against what makes a good Die Hard, which is this constant stream of comedy. Of course, when you do get these moments of comedy, Bruce Willis massacres them. But
yeah.
In the last quarter of the movie, it's like, oh, this is kind of what it could have always been. We get a the problem is, I think, at its best, the part of the Die Hard franchise it resembles is the last half of Die Hard with a Vengeance.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm kind of the movie that they're calling back. They're calling back to the worst part,
to the least successful part of any of the other sequels.
The least successful part of what is, to at least in my opinion, overall the least successful of the Die Hard movies. There's lots of double crossing and triple crossing, and I think that they are doing that thing, and I don't know why number 5 in the series has to do this, of like, okay, let's do all the Die Hard things in the last 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So you get Bruce Willis in the vest, you get a bunch of explosions, you get some nice action stuff. The rapport is a little better, the chemistry is it kind of improves. You have like sardonic comedy offsetting things. But
the chemistry with his son does seem to not pick up until the end.
Yeah. But so I'd say, as a consistent section of the movie, it kind of reveals itself as a Die Hard. That, the first 3/4 of the movie were a disguise that it then unmasks itself, and it's like, oh, okay, so we're at now what we should have started out to be. But I mean, that is not an enjoyable viewing experience.
No.
To have to wait that long to get that tiny little morsel of
sliver,
of what you really want.
Well, and there's just there's so many things that fall flat.
I like the choices of the John McClane Jr. I like the opening credits. I wish I could say that I would have liked this as a different kind of movie, but I don't like the way this is filmed at all.
No, yeah, me either.
It's nauseating. The colors,
it's got a muted
color contrast are just horrible.
Yeah.
So I don't even like it as a regular gritty thriller.
Right.
So I sadly don't have much to say about it, except that it gets better before it gets much, much worse. I think it's the worst ending in terms of the final scene of the franchise, for sure.
Which ending are we talking about? The action ending or the...
No, that's pretty good. The
last seconds ending.
The scene done in mime for some reason.
Right, okay,
of
yeah.
the family reuniting, which is kind of the moment I was really looking forward to.
Exactly.
Big moment in the franchise.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this moment, and it just kind of, like everything else in this movie, falls flat,
Yeah.
There's so many things that just kind of, I don't know, it just needles me in this movie, like they, you have this huge car chase. John McClane should be dead twice. The bad guys should definitely be dead, even if they're in this indestructible hulk of whatever it is they're driving.
Yeah.
because they go over a rail. And, I mean, it's like that crash is ridiculous. And then they escape, but get found again. And there's this moment where John McClane, using his superpowers, can just deduce that bad baddies are about to come into the room. So he picks up an M60, I think, is what it looks like, and he just starts shooting guys dead while screaming about being on vacation. But what bothers me the most is no bad guy takes cover. They just keep walking into the room for him to shoot, one after another. I mean, it just feels Keystone Cops, but with death and violence.
Yeah, and the frame one. I think another big problem in the movie is the frame of reference. You mentioned Keystone Cops. I don't think that was an intended reference, but even that kind of intended references in the movies, there's a little flavor of Cronenberg's Eastern Promises, which is a pretty big kind of Russian-based movie a few years before. There's a little bit of Crystal Skull, Last Crusade in the way that they're tied together, and the fact it's son and father.
And that's not a movie you want to emulate.
Neither really are ones you want to emulate. Well, I thought it's well, I quite enjoyed Last Crusade, so why isn't this working for me? Because I knew Harrison Ford before this movie started as Indiana Jones. We've never met John Jr. before. We don't. This is not what would happen if these two guys to get together. It's first tell me who this guy is, and then I'll let you know whether they'll be a good pairing. There's a plot line from The Living Daylights, of all things. I mean, it's so strange. It's almost like it's trying to pull from everything but a Die Hard.
Yeah, and for me, the espionage stuff, every single moment we're talking about these Russians and the key and one guy, pitted against another guy, two words just keep rolling through my head, and it's who cares?
Yeah.
They don't make you care about anybody for a single second. And this is one place where I think this movie fails greatly. You take a look at Die Hard 2, and we've talked about it, how many great characters are in Die Hard 2? Everybody's interesting. You want to know a little bit more about all of them. You're fine to share screen time with those characters. And there aren't any other really interesting characters in this movie. Even his own son isn't really that interesting.
No, he's like it made me grateful that in Live Free or Die Hard they didn't turn Lucy into a mini John McClane.
Right, yeah.
Because that's totally what they do here.
Except he seems a little hapless, he doesn't have all the answers. He's supposed to be a super spy, and yet he keeps making mistakes, and then when his father, the cop, says, so what's next, he goes, I don't know.
I think it almost to me feels like that there's a writer on this movie who was trying to use lines of dialogue in the script as a cry for help. He was whoever this was having creative control wrestled out of his hands, and he just kept putting lines in that make the viewer question what you're seeing. The scene when John McClane finds out that his son is in the CIA, he's sort of saying, 007, spy shit. It's that's what I'm thinking. Why are we doing this?
Right, yeah.
Why are we in a spy movie? Then later on, I can't remember who it says it, but it says, Are we really going to Chernobyl? And I'm sort of that's what I'm thinking. And clearly the screenwriters are asking themselves this same question. Are we really doing this?
Right. They're asking themselves enough to make characters ask the questions that the audience is saying to themselves.
Yes.
This is not a recipe for success. So I'm glad you brought up the writer, because I was curious and I looked him up. Well, everything except his name. Sorry. But
he would probably make that choice anyway to remain nameless.
Yeah. The person who wrote this also wrote Swordfish, the A-Team movie, and X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Oh, well, that is quite a resume.
Does that say a lot? Does that explain it?
To some extent, yeah. Yeah. It does, but it does feel it feels like there's a lot of different. It doesn't feel like it's one writer. Is it just one writer officially?
I think so. I'd have to double check, but I think it was just one.
It feels like it feels like they were going for a very serious movie, and then weirdly, once they get to Chernobyl, everything lightens up.
Right, I know.
Which is, after sort of making a big deal, I kind of liked, there was some continuity with Live Free or Die Hard in that real historical events, WMDs, Chernobyl, were driving the story.
Uh-huh.
I kind of like that. But then they undermine that by having them make a joke about radiation sickness and Bruce Willis being bald, which is sort of like, so it's all a joke.
Yeah, and it felt like the whole turn towards Chernobyl was to get to that joke.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Especially since, HBO's made a pretty kind of like epic miniseries, grim,
Right.
like complex history of this. It does kind of pale in comparison. It was such a strange choice to go to Russia, but when you get to Russia, to not be very clear what you think of Russia politically.
Right. Instead, you have like Bruce Willis stopping a car and the guy getting out and speaking to him in Russian, and he just punches him and says, "I don't understand what you're saying." I mean,
There's your toxic
ugly American.
masculinity.
Yeah, that's the toxic masculinity. You're the ugly American, as ugly as you can get. It all kind of speaks to like a world I just don't want any part of.
Do you know what could have redeemed that scene? If he punches the guy speaking Russian, and then behind him we hear Samuel Jackson's voice saying, "Say up to the same old tricks, huh, McClane?" And he's been sent there too.
Right. I see you're still an asshole.
Yeah, it's very strange. I mean, there is. I mean, given that they're very, because I was sort of like, oh, so they're flirting with the idea of it being a spy movie, and then they say in the dialogue, "We're now in a spy movie."
Uh-huh.
But they don't really follow that up with anything except, what we get in that same kind of confused.
No, nothing that.
Second half Die Hard with a Vengeance. Who's who's a villain? Who's the hero? Yeah. Double, triple crosses. I mean, it's interesting. Speaking of like the geographical location of it, Bruce Willis takes that piece of information about traffic in the Garden Ring, and he utilizes that to the max. That saves his life like 3 or 4 times in this movie.
That's the genius cop part of him cropping up to the surface.
Yeah, the traffic in the Garden Ring, therefore you are the villain.
Yeah, he's got these moments where at the end we're talking about he's deducing things because he can't find the dancing bad guy.
Right.
Where's the dancer?
Can I just talk for a minute about the scene in which, just not that it matters, but the plot of this movie is basically that both John and John McClane Jr. are transporting a Russian dissident to what they think is safety because he has some piece of intelligence the Americans need, whatever. But at a certain point in the movie, they realize that this guy is the bad guy who's actually running everything.
Uh-huh.
And it totally flips around on itself. The scene where they find that out is the slowest recorded scene in Western cinema. It seems like everyone in the scene has dementia. It goes so slowly. At one point, one of them says, "Not so fast." I'm like, you could not get any slower.
Right.
You really, technically, physically could not get any slower.
It's as though all the accidents that John McClane has finally caught up to his brain. It's like he's an old football player.
Oh, yeah. And, there's once the movie, there's kind of nods here and there to the franchise, like the villain eats a carrot. We remember Jeremy Irons has a hard-boiled egg.
Yeah.
In when he's the villain, we think that they're terrorists and they're actually just out for the money, and so we get that. There's kind of like a sub-level catchphrase in this movie, which is, "So it was just about the money." It's like it's close to "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker" in terms of how many times it's said in these movies.
Right. And
So they're not ignoring the franchise. They're just ignoring the logic that underpins it, I think.
yeah, I think you're right about that. There's, it's like this movie tried to stand on its own with no legs.
Yeah. And no brain.
Yeah, right. The other thing that, and just to finish up, one thing that really bothers me about this movie is the amount of CGI that you see at the end and how bad it is. Like that helicopter crash.
You mean when they're falling down? Into the water.
That's not as bad, but like the helicopter crash is clearly computer generated.
Yeah.
And then you have like a full front-on shot of CGI Bruce Willis falling through a window. And I just think to myself,
I want to do a devil's advocate with you here because, as you might suspect, I completely agree with you. But I just to make things interesting. Now, this franchise as a whole has used a lot of green screen, a lot of digital imaging. What's the word? Compositing. From like from Die Hard 2. So is the difference just our nostalgia for it? Will we be looking back at that effect? Because they're comparable in terms of how artificial it looks.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's done better in other movies.
Is it done? But and again, this is debating skills. Devil's advocate.
Uh-huh.
Is it just our nostalgia? Will we be looking back on this lovingly and overlooking some of the anti-realism of it? Like, will we be doing this with the fighter jet?
No.
Because there's a big difference for me. The ejector seat in Die Hard 2, the matte painting of the planes. Like, I go, oh, isn't that cute? Look at them. They didn't know how to do this yet.
Well, so you're talking about the end of Die Hard 2 with the paintings of planes with people moving around them. And it does make you go, well, what the fuck? But like you said, in a kind of, sort of way, But put against that, I'll say, when he kills that helicopter with the car in Live Free or Die Hard,
yeah,
that's like 8 different shots.
Mm-hmm.
The chopper being filmed somewhere, the car being filmed, the rotator blades of the helicopter, like the helicopter itself was held up by wires in that shot.
Okay.
The rotor for the helicopter was just CGI. But that's all put together to make you believe that happened in that moment. Guy jumped off the helicopter. Like, it's just done better. In this movie, the helicopter crashes, and you could just see sort of animated fire, animated smoke, and you just think, oh, for fucking fuck's sake.
I'm glad that was your defense because aside from trying to provoke you into saying something like that, my actual note on that scene was falling through the building into the water. Looks like they're in a cartoon, a completely artificial visual reality. But I'm just kind of trying to question where those assumptions come from.
That's fantastic.
To see if we're being fair to this movie, and whether if we give it 20 years, we'll be going, oh, remember when everything looked like a cartoon?
I get that, like, this movie pisses you off enough throughout that by the end you're gonna be less forgiving, maybe. But honestly, I think like it deserves any admonishment it receives. It's
how does it stand up in the so each of these movies has a like a piece of pop music, shall we say?
Mm-hmm.
Like a piece of signature pop music. This one is Doom and Gloom by the Rolling Stones, Which, what do you think of that in relation to Creedence and Lovin' Spoonful?
So here's the funny part. Like, when you first started talking about that, I was like, what song is in this movie? Like, everything about this movie is so forgetful that I forgot that song's in it. So that's
well, I had to look it up because it sounds like a Rolling Stones song from the 60s, but it's actually contemporaneous. But it's a song, it's like the Rolling Stones trying to sound like, well, not 60s, maybe like early 70s Rolling Stones.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that was an interesting musical choice because it's like saying, you know, we've kind of told a story with these pieces of music that we're, you know what? I think I've exhausted everything.
Yeah, I was gonna say, stop talking.
Movie. I'm talking about the outro track.
Just stop. This movie doesn't deserve any kindness. Like, here's my last note, all right? We're going to end this podcast on this last note. And we talked about it once before, but at the very end of the movie, where the McClanes are brought back together and nothing that you want to happen happens, here's my note. Sunwalk. Boo.
Right.
That pretty much sums up everything about this movie. They're just walking through a sunset, and it's made to look like a golden moment, and all I'm thinking is, fucking boo.
Yeah. And here's one last thing. Do they ever mention Nagasaki in this movie?
Nakatomi, you mean? You keep saying Nagasaki.
I keep saying Nagasaki, don't I?
Get your act together, please. People died there.
Mike, you're going to have to go back and
Jesus.
change every time I say Nagasaki to Nagatomi.
You're a terrible monster.
Anyway,
Nakatomi Tower.
Because there's a scene where the villain says, "It's not 1986, you know." I mean, is that just bad screenwriting? And it's like, when was Nakatomi? I don't know, 1986. Or is that the Cold War? What does that mean?
That's another mark against this movie. Ugh.
Okay. That was meant to defend it.
Well,
okay.
Stop trying. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no way to defend this movie as far as I'm concerned. Tom seems to be on my same page despite all his best efforts. You can tell us what you think of A Good Day to Die Hard. Find us on Facebook or Instagram. Find us on Twitter. Find us at the Everything Sequel Podcast at Gmail. Send us an email. Tell us what you think. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Does the coronavirus have you feeling oogie? Have you been sitting on your couch for weeks? Nay, have you been sitting on there for months? Well, it's time for you to get back in shape. Check out 2AT Fitness. You can find them on Instagram. You can find them on Facebook. 2AT Fitness was started by Tina Bernard. She is ready and raring to go to help you get back into the shape you want to get into. They've got all kinds of classes. They've got outdoor in-person classes. They've got online classes if that's what you prefer. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to get back in shape. You're going to find a variety of exercises. You're going to have strength training, cardio, weightlifting, even fun 5-minute burnouts that will push you to your limits. So get off the couch, get into shape. Go ahead and check out 2AT Fitness. Tina Bernard has got you for all your needs. I know her personally. She's fantastic. You're not going to meet a better person to help you become the new you. Check it out.